Welcome to Best 1031 Online, where you will get expert insights into all aspects of tax-deferred 1031 exchange from some of the nation's most well-known commercial real estate professionals, as well as CPAs, accommodators, wealth managers, and others. Here's your host, 1031 Broker James.
Let me tell you something. If you're a practicing commercial real estate broker trying to keep up in today's market, you cannot do it all yourself. I couldn't do what I do without my virtual assistant from CRE Task Wizard. Their VAs are trained specifically for commercial real estate administrative work, which frees me up to focus on revenue-producing activities. If you want your time back and your sanity back, go to CRETaskWizard.com. Tell them 1031 Broker James sent you, and they'll waive your onboarding fee. CRE Task Wizard. Buy your time back. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of QI Corner. I am 1031 Broker James, along with my co-host Greg Burns of IPX1031. Good afternoon, Greg. Long time no see.
Hi, James. How are you? Yeah, how you been?
I've been good. I have been good. First quarter has been a little crazy, but it's the world we live in, right?
Yeah, the market is interesting, to say the least.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to dive right in. This episode, we are going to talk about the safe harbor reverse exchange and the non-safe harbor reverse exchange. So let's just basically start it by setting the stage on what a reverse exchange is. So, most investors are familiar with the standard delayed exchange, but what is exactly a reverse exchange and when does it become necessary?
So a reverse exchange basically is like a flip-flop of a regular forward exchange, right? So you're buying the property that you want before you sell the property that you have. They've become actually really very popular over the last couple of years. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, but it is become really a popular option for customers. And so the client goes out, they find a property that they want to buy, they make an offer on it, they put it under contract, but they know that they're not going to be able to sell the property that they have in the amount of time. So they hire us to step in as their qualified intermediary. We create this thing called an EAT, an Exchange Accommodation Title Holder, which is basically an LLC that's going to become the new buyer. And so we're the sole member of this LLC. We make the client the manager of it. And that LLC then assigns into the contract as a new buyer. So the client's got to have, the big thing with the reverse is you got to have the capital available to be able to acquire this property, without selling the property that you have, because you're not going to have any of the equity from that. And there's various ways that people do that. I had a client that got a loan against their securities to do it. I've had a client that cross-collateralized some properties to do it. I've obviously have clients that just have capital available on the sidelines to do it. And if there's going to be a loan involved, it's really important to get the lender on board early on in the conversation about doing a reverse. Loans can be challenging in reverse exchanges. Typically, they're only going to be commercial lenders. And so, most of the bigger lending institutions, they don't really like doing reverses. So they're probably going to they're going to have to find a smaller kind of lender to get that done if they're going to use a lender.
Right. I was going to bring that up, is that there's been two reverse exchanges that I've been involved in where in both cases, the taxpayer needed to get a loan in order to buy that replacement property first. And oddly enough, in both cases, the first lender they talked to was Wells Fargo, and Wells just was not signing on. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that can become a challenge, especially if the lender is not familiar with how a reverse exchange works and the position they take because of the EAT, etc.
Yeah. So LLC assigns you the contract as the buyer. The client basically sends the money to closing to close the deal, whether it be all cash or it's a down payment plus a loan. And then the LLC shows that as a loan to the LLC. So whatever cash they put in, the LLC gives them back a note for that cash. And we don't obviously want to run and operate the property. So what we do is we triple net lease the property back to the client. So the client keeps insurance on it. They collect rents. They basically have all control of the property while we're holding title. And then from the date we close, it's a flip-flop of a regular exchange. They have then 45 days to identify the property or properties that they'd like to sell. And then they have another 135 days after that to close. So it's a total of 180 days. Once the property that they're selling goes under contract and into escrow, we assign into that transaction just like a regular 1031. So when that sale closes, like a regular 1031, the proceeds come to us, and then we use that money to pay back and pay off that note. And if there's additional funds left over, we can use it to pay down the loan. In some cases, there's abundance of funds left over. And at that point, someone could spring into a forward 1031. And then once we've kind of completed the reverse part of it, we then give the client 100% interest in the LLC we created. So we do an entity transfer opposed to a property transfer. And the reason we set it up that way is to try to avoid double transfer taxes.
Right. Good point. So the Exchange Accommodation Title Holder, otherwise known as the E.
Yep.
Why does that exist?
Well, because the client can't be on title to both properties at the same time. So that's why we have to create this entity to hold title. And really, for all intensive purposes, it looks kind of like a forward exchange because you have this kind of straw holder holding title to the property. Their sale property sells, and then they take the proceeds and then run it into this property that they've already purchased. So, and so that's the way it's kind of structured that way. It actually is interesting. When they actually wrote the reverse regs for the Treasury back in 2000, I think it was, they asked for 2 years to complete reverse, or what they call an improvement exchange. And so the regs were written by outside attorneys who wrote kind of these regs. Some of them were attorneys that actually worked on the original 1031 documents. And so they submitted these, to the Treasury Department. They came back and said, hey, we're only going to give you 180 days. And the problem with that is that for this group of lawyers that were working on this language, they had clients that were, doing these massive reverse exchanges where they were moving manufacturing facilities, and it really would have just killed the 1031 market for these companies. And so, interestingly enough, the IRS came back with some language, or the Treasury came back with some language that they put a no inference clause into the reverse exchange regulations. And that no inference clause basically says, hey, just because you go outside of the 180-day period doesn't necessarily mean you don't have a valid exchange. It's just not covered under the safe harbor. So, go ahead.
That's a great segue to take us into the next part of this episode, is explaining the difference between a safe harbor reverse and a non-safe harbor reverse.
Yeah. So safe harbor, you fall within the 180 days. Non-safe harbor, you go outside of the 180 days. We try to take more ownership of that property. California does not like, typical fashion, California doesn't like the non-safe harbor reverses. And so it may not work for California purposes, even though it may work for federal purposes. But we have had, we have done quite a few of them. I think we're the first company to receive an approved private letter ruling from the IRS on doing a non-safe harbor reverse, because we had been doing reverse exchanges prior to the regs and just kind of following along with case law. And it really didn't change that much the way that we actually do reverses. We were doing them pretty much the way that the regs were written, prior to the regs even being published. So you can go outside of the safe harbor. Like I said, the first one we got approved they went out 1.5 years. And we do have, I do have a couple currently that are going outside of the safe harbor as well. So, it can be done. Ideally, you don't want it to be done that way, but if it has to be, it has to be.
And what's typically the reason that would differentiate from the safe harbor I know it's outside or inside the 180 days, but
There could just be extenuating circumstances that don't allow the property to be sold in that time. Maybe you're moving manufacturing facilities and you bought this new property. It has to be built out and everything's got to be transferred over to the new property, and you still need to operate your company out of this old property. And so for that reason, you just can't get it done within that 6 month period. So there's lots of reasons why.
And are there any penalties to the non-safe harbor?
No, I mean, not if it's, not if you kind of do it according to the case law or private letter rulings that exist. I think that while it's not obviously as safe, obviously as following within the 180-day period, I think that they are, a very viable option.
I know a couple of, and we've talked about this before in regards to the reverse exchange is many people, in fact, I just heard of this last week. Somebody closed on a property thinking that was their replacement property, and they had yet to engage with an accommodator.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum because I had a client, it probably was 6 months ago, who talked to me initially about doing a reverse exchange. And then for whatever reason, she was a real estate agent. For whatever reason, she went on to ChatGPT and then looked up, reverse exchanges, and it said in there, oh yeah, you can do a reverse after you close on the replacement property, which is not right. And so the client closed on that replacement property, and then she, called me up like a day or two later and said, oh, we closed on the replacement property, we're ready to do the reverse. And I'm like, you can't do it at this point.
But Chad said I could.
Yeah, she actually sent me, the screenshot of what ChatGPT had sent her, and it's amazing to me, how often that is incorrect, especially when you're looking at really technical stuff for 1031 purposes. It gets things wrong all the time. So I think it could be a possibility of one, 1031 has a lot of gray areas, but two, you don't input that information correctly. But I think it's definitely an amazing tool. But when it comes to, dealing with, tax issues or legal issues, you're much better off, having a live person on the other end of the line.
Yeah. So what would you say is the single most important thing that they should understand about the reverse before they attempt one?
If you're not buying all cash, definitely the lender is the most important part. So if you're not going to be able to take down that property with cash, and you're going to have to get a loan. If it's residential, you're going to have a really tough time getting a loan. Axos Bank right now is one of the lenders we're seeing doing those, but they're one of very, very few. And so that's a big part of it. And then also, pricing your property correctly. I mean, as there are a lot of, properties on the market, and a lot of them are not selling simply because, the buyer and seller gap is just kind of still too wide. And so you go, and in a regular 1031, right, your sale closes, you go into a motivated buyer mode. But when you do a reverse, you're like a motivated seller. So it's important to understand that you're going to have to, price your property, take the advice of somebody like you and price the property appropriately so that you are, you can get it sold in that 180-day period.
Right. This falls into that same thread of conversation that we have pretty much on every episode, is like the more time you take to plan it out, map it out before you start executing steps, the more likely your exchange is going to be successful, regardless if you're doing a forward or a reverse.
Advance planning is always important. Yeah. I mean, anytime anybody calls me, I always go back to the same thing, which is like, make sure that you have a plan in place, before you start to execute anything. And then number two, you got to be aggressive when you're doing a 1031, whether you're doing a reverse or whether you're doing a forward exchange, you need to be aggressive.
Yeah. And that even includes, because I just had this conversation last week with a gentleman who he knows that what the market landscape is, and he's being very smart, and he's talking to the owner of the property he wants to buy as the replacement, making sure that
That's
they're
good.
on the same page. And then he's also making sure that he's talking to his agent that's going to list his relinquished property. And
Yeah.
that's just really smart. It's like, let's get pricing down. Let's get this down. Fortunately, he doesn't need a loan, and so that part is good.
That's good.
So yeah, reverse exchanges can be incredibly powerful tools when timing becomes critical. But as Greg explained today, the structure, the safe harbor rules, it makes it essential that investors work with experienced professionals, and that's why conversations like this matter. So, Greg, thank you as always. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, you bet.
Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave comments, and we will see you on the next episode of QI Corner.